Eternal God, in the reading of Scripture, may your word be heard. In the meditations of our hearts, may your word be known. And in the faithfulness of our lives, may your word be shown. Amen. On Wednesday morning, I received a phone call from Ron Shaw. And for those who haven't met Ron sings in the choir. He's not here today. He's preaching in Crossroads. And he is a reporter for CTV Atlantic. And you often see his pieces at First at 5. And this week he called me Wednesday morning and wanted to know basically what was the church's response to the warning about the famine in South Sudan. And I gave him a contact name and person for our conference office and general counsel just to see what was going on. And the story aired that evening about the South Sudan. Did anyone see the story with Ron Shaw at First at 5? I have the clip if somebody's interested in seeing it, but it was well written and well done, as well as you can do in our 3-minute soundbite era. How do we get information to people in this time when attention spans are getting smaller and smaller and smaller? So Ron was on with his story, and that made me start to dig. And the first things that I came across were from there wasn't a lot in the Herald that I could see, and in other papers, not even in some of the like New York Times and other pieces. Where I found perhaps the most interesting stuff was through the UN News Center, United Nations News Center. And on the 30th of March, there was an article that said, "Conflict now eroding food security in stable areas of South Sudan." So the ongoing conflict in the South Sudan is affecting food security in some of the country's more stable states, the head of the United Nations peacekeeping operation there has said. Dwindling provisions arriving in the town and skyrocketing food prices have meant that places like Awawi, which are generally peaceful, have suffered the effects of the conflict taking place in other parts of the country, said David Shearer, head of the UN mission in South Sudan. It is imperative that the fighting stops so that citizens of the world's newest nation can live in peace and enjoy the benefits of independence. The agencies have stepped in to provide emergency humanitarian aid, and it goes on to talk about how they have decided to start sending convoys into the places that are less secure, just because the food is so desperately needed. And then the next day, there was an article that said UN partners warn 1.8 million people face severe food insecurity worldwide. And the article continues on to talk about some of the causes. Civil conflict being one of the hugest causes of problems. Out of the 10 worst humanitarian crises that the UN is tracking, 9 of them have some type of conflict taking place, whether it is civil war or some other armed conflict. And one of the things in Ron's article was saying about the South Sudan was that it's easy to see all the planes with weapons come in, but very few planes with food. And how do you distribute it in those places where ISIL and ISIS and other places it's just creating a climate that's so difficult to control, to respond to. It feels like a place of death, a place where hope is distant. Well, and I also looked at some clips when you're going through the articles and some of the video clips, and it wasn't long before I had to intentionally search a "Whose Line Is It Anyway" clip. Just something lighter, because the despair was overwhelming. There is a prayer that I found myself being drawn to that was in the resources about today's reading. And it comes from this sense of this place of death and despair. There are so many reasons to give up, O God. Help us not to do that. Help us to know that in the midst of all the despair we encounter in daily newscasts, you are indeed present in our lives, daring to bring hope in the midst of it all, and challenging us to do the same. Amen. Last Saturday, April presented a workshop for us about talking to our kids about God. And one of the sections that she had was telling a great children's story, a great Bible story. And we did a fair amount of work on that. And it was really quite exciting to see the creativity that can come and just the desire to be able to tell our kids about God and to answer their questions in the midst of everything that's going on in our world. And one of the things that we talked about is, what do you do with the story? Does it have to have a moral at the end? And no, it doesn't. Just let the story sit. Let it marinate as part of us. Let it marinate. Let it become part of who we are, so that when something does happen, we have a connection in our story of our family of faith. On Saturday, I've conducted the funeral service for Madeline Way. Madeline would have been 99 years old today, so one of the oldest members of our congregation. But what struck me as I was sitting with and working with and speaking to the family was that we had in that room 5 generations. 5 generations. We had great grandchildren present. And marinating in the story of their lives, the story of their encounter, the story of our faith, where we're moved to places of hope. We're moved out of those places of despair. We're moved from the place of the grave clothes. So, as Stephen, and thank you for reading that, Stephen, I really don't intentionally pick the longest readings for when certain people are reading. I'll accept it when it was Daryl, maybe. That wonderful story. Can you share with us what resonates with you as you heard that story today? What was the connection point for you in the story? What troubled you? What resonated? Does anyone want to share a piece of the story that was important to them? Like, this is a story that we know. We've been told and we've heard it from the time that we were little. What part of the story connected with you today?
I think where they said they wanted to go lie down and die with him.
Okay. So they have this, that's one of the things that has bothered me about the story, because I've been in those places that it's felt like I've been entombed. It's felt like I've had the grave clothes left on me and wondered, why in the hell didn't Jesus or God or somebody do something about it? And in that story, Jesus intentionally stays away 2 more days. And there was a point in my life that I was mad at Jesus. And it's okay to be mad at Jesus. He can take it. Be mad as mad. I mean, why did you let me die? You could have done something. You stayed 2 more days. But what you're talking about, Debbie, is sort of the next step to that when they're talking about the context of why he stayed away. They're trying to kill him and his band. They have no idea what lies in store for them next time they go to Jerusalem. They've been told, you come back, you're dead, is basically what's happening in the story. And so we have Thomas, who gets a bad rep in a lot of the things, who ends up saying, okay, they have their little conversation, debate. Jesus is resolute going back to Jerusalem. Okay, let's go. We'll all go and die with him. To go back to that place, to embrace that place of despair. Maybe that has a connection with us as we're talking about famine, as we're talking about food security. Is it time to pull and cut foreign aid and peacekeeping and other pieces, or is it time to actually go into the situation? As complex as it is. Thank you, Debbie. Anyone else have something they were... Where did I put the mic? We would need to hear you, so.
I think what I was struck by was the compassion when he does arrive, and he cries with them on his way to the tomb.
Okay. The compassion. That's the, and if you haven't been listening, if you don't know that come and see is one of my favorite motifs in John's gospel and talk about discipleship. That's how they discover who Jesus is, but here it's reversed. Come and see, and Jesus wept. But the thing that is extraordinary about that piece is that it's not just the grief of Mary and Martha, but it's the grief of the whole community and the compassion of the whole community that he sees and becomes part of and offers something of it. And it's also the community needs to be a part of this healing. Okay? Did you notice that? Go to him and unbind him. Look after him. He can't do it himself. Okay? Other things that connect? There's all kinds. We could preach on this story for the whole year. What Marcia is saying is that underlying feeling that in the story that there's hope. That there is hope. And that we shouldn't give up. And there's part of it we talk theologically in terms of, well, let's let God be God and God can look after this. And that sort of, at times, on one hand, lets us off the hook. Doesn't mean we have to do anything because God's going to look after it. To the other side, which says that it's our responsibility. God has given us the tools. Like, we have enough food to feed the world. But do we have the political will to make sure that the conditions are in place to make sure that the world is fed? Do we have the political will to end the conflicts? Do we have the political will to make sure that children don't die of starvation? Do we have the political will to make sure that the poverty line is eradicated? That poverty no longer exists? We have the means. Just do we have the political will? And what is our part in it? And if we say, well, it's the government's responsibility, then I think that is an abdication of our responsibility. Now, it's hard to know what to do, and we can try to figure that out, but that's why we marinate in this story. What holds us in the tomb? What is it that binds us and wraps us?
The enormity
the enormity of the problem. Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes we often blame governments. They don't have the political will, but they have the will if they knew, if we let them know. We have to have the personal will, either as Christians or citizens or fellow human beings on the planet. We have to know that everything that we do causes something somewhere else. And it's that way through nature and through humanity. And so we have to find our humanity and step out of our comfort zone and say, yes, this is something that has to be done. We don't care what's done in any other country. We are who we are. We have to show that will.
Yeah. There's a lot of risk involved, isn't there? Yes.
Of course there is.
Thank you, Hillary. Yeah. So that story sort of marinates with us, and let it continue to do that. Sandra Rooney, in a blog, wrote this piece, and I want to share it with you. Described as the worst humanitarian crisis since 1945, headlines announce it, our mail solicitations repeat it. But governments have been slow to respond to the famine facing Somalia, South Sudan, northeast Nigeria, and Yemen. Over a month ago, United Nations General Secretary announced that 20 million people were facing starvation in these 4 countries if more aid isn't forthcoming. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, near the end of March, it had received barely a tenth of the 4.4 billion needed in the appeal. Deliver food, clean water, basic medicines such as oral rehydration salts to avert diarrhea deaths among children. In a world filled with excess food, yet 20 million people are on the brink of famine, including 1.4 million children. We have to ask why. Why can't the world's most powerful avert this preventable catastrophe? 2 primary reasons. First is the lack of money or the lack of people willing to give the money. And this is especially the case as we've heard that our friends south of the border who have a huge foreign aid budget are cutting it or intend to cut it. And the second reason is more complex. War, drought, and weak governance compound the situations. All 4 countries are reeling from the effects of serious conflict, and in many instances, the security situation is so bad that aid workers are unable to accurately assess the level of hunger. Often, in fact, aid workers are blocked from delivering relief where it's most needed. Add to this the fact that food insecurity can actually exacerbate conflict. In the world's war zones, a shortage of food is one of the primary factors driving people away from their countries, according to Hussein. Difficult as it may be to face the situation, can the world just look away? And in one of the articles, it also connected the food insecurity in Iraq and Syria, and then the conflicts and the things that we know about Aleppo. And one of the things that I've learned from Hassan, and hasn't been that many conversations, but the conversation that I've had with her, she's the matriarch of our Syrian newcomers. And she always brings us back to talking about what's happening in Syria, what's happening with her family, what's happening in the neighboring area, just to keep us conscious of the greater need. And I have appreciated that. And she does it in such a way that inspires hope. Tough situations, but inspires hope. There's a Spanish song, and we sing it, the English translation of it every once in a while, but one of the verses says, Mid times of sorrow and in times of pain, when sensing beauty or in love's embrace, whether we suffer or sing rejoicing, we belong to God. We belong to God. I want you to meet Bana.
Dear Donald Trump, my name is Bana Al-Abid and I am 7 years old, Syrian girl from Aleppo. I am part of Syrian children who suffered. Some of my friends died. I am very sad about them. They are suffering because of adult people. I know you will be the President of America. If you promise me you will do something for the children of Syria, I am already your new friend.
That 7-year-old became rather famous as she and her mother were tweeted out of the besieged Aleppo before Christmas. Now she's pointing to Donald Trump, and especially in light of the planned cuts for foreign aid. It's appropriate, but it's not just for Donald Trump. It's for governments around the world. It's for people with to find a political will to do something. But it's beyond the governments, as Hillary said. It goes to us. What can we do? How can we offer hope? Her mother's Twitter account that she's doing now, she uses it herself. And there's about 360,000 followers at the present time. Across this wide world, we shall always find those who are crying with no peace of mind. But when we help them and when we feed them, we belong to God. We belong to God. May it be so. Amen.